Welcome to the Jack Hopkins Show podcast, where stories about the power of focus and resilience are revealed by the people who live those stories. And now, the host of the Jack Hopkins Show podcast, Jack Hopkins.
All right, so Dane, the first thing that I noticed about you is that you were a swimmer. And that stood out for me because my oldest daughter was a swimmer.
Oh, okay.
And she had the opportunity when she was like, I think 10, 11 years old. We lived in Springfield, Missouri at the time.
Yeah.
And the college there, they had a really outstanding swimming coach. The college swimming coach. It just so happened that the kids' swimming team in the evening, he was also the head coach.
Oh, wow.
For them, which was really, you know, when you consider the time they put in with their college kids, really an outstanding thing. So I got exposed to the swimming world through I knew nothing about it at all.
Right.
Yeah. We just, hey, here's something that she might like to try. Mm-hmm. And it turned out she was a pretty good little swimmer. So I bring this up because I know swimming is a different thing. Swimming is, well, first, I guess, let me ask, were you a distance swimmer or a sprint swimmer?
Well, that's what's funny is I started off, I was a sprint swimmer. And on the last meet of the first year that I swam in high school, we were going to swim a team that wasn't very good. So we swam off events so that we wouldn't kill them by too much. And right. I had never swam more than 100. And they put me in the 500. And I was like, what are you doing? And I came like 6 seconds from breaking the school record. And my coach says, guess what you're swimming next year? And I was like, no. So I kind of did both sprints and distance, which was definitely odd.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And which of those two did you feel like you were most suited to?
I was definitely suited for distance. I was decent at sprints, but I didn't have a very good start and I didn't have a very good turn. And so when you're swimming a 50, it's like 75% start and turn. And I would just muscle through the rest of it.
Right.
My coach said we swam in a 25 meter pool, which was pretty rare around our parts. Most people had yard pools. He said if we had actually had an Olympic sized pool, I would have been so much better simply because I would have had 9 less flip turns to mess up on what he said.
Yeah. And that really is, like you said, that's a huge factor.
Yeah,
certainly. So you go from being a swimmer in high school. Did you play football in high school as well?
I did. I played, I was a wide receiver in high school. Yeah.
Okay. That's the position I played as well.
Oh, okay.
So you graduate high school and I see that you went to Penn State and attempted to walk on as a football player.
Yeah.
And
I made it to the final cut of the walk-on tryouts before I got cut, which was pretty impressive because it's funny when you're young. Impressive considering that I am not that talented. is what I mean to say is because when you're young, you're like, oh yeah, I'm gonna make college and then I'm gonna make the pros and all that, and it's so funny looking back. I did not have the talent to even get as far as I did get. I just happened to I'm really good at catching balls. And during the tryout, the walk-on tryout coach was Larry Johnson Sr. If you remember Larry Johnson, he played for the Chiefs and he was at Penn State. And I'm not that fast and I'm not physically imposing, but I could catch everything. And at one point, they were throwing balls and they were really off. And I thought, how bad are these quarterbacks? Because I'm like having to do these acrobatic catches. And at one point, Larry Johnson said, can you just drop a damn ball so that I can cut you? It's going to be so much easier. Yeah. Needless to say, I didn't make it. And I didn't make it to the final cutout. But when I was walking out of the tryouts, the rugby coach had wisely positioned himself there and was like, hey, do you want to try out for rugby? And I was like, yeah, sure. I had no idea what it was. So
Sure.
that's how that
Sure.
correlated into.
And if you were to because I've watched on television, I've watched a handful of rugby games. Don't know anything about it to speak of. If you were to talk of where the overlap between football as we know it and rugby, where is that overlap?
I mean, rugby is more soccer than it is football. There's actually a lot of interesting habits that you have to get rid of in football in order to be a good rugby player, like trying to gain that extra yard or something like that. In football, you're like, you want to stay as close as you can to your teammates as possible because there are no downs in rugby. As soon as you're tackled, that next play starts again. So you want your teammates there to kind of create like a line of scrimmage. And so, we had an incredible team at Penn State. I was B squad at best. We were runners up national champion both years that I was there.
Wow.
And we were just a club team. So we were playing against fully scholarship teams, like out of Cal Berkeley and stuff like that. We had a couple of U.S. Eagles on Penn State's team, which is the national team for America. So we had college kids that were national players. And so I have no delusions of grandeur of where I fell on the squad. I was, tackle fodder, basically, is all that I was. But I got to be around excellence, which was really, really fun.
Right. Yeah, I know what you mean. It's interesting. I grew up in a town of about 6,000 people, right?
Okay.
Little 2A high school, right?
Was that in Missouri or where was that?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
In Trenton, Missouri.
Okay. All right.
90 miles northeast of Kansas City and about an hour west of Kirksville, Missouri, if you know what that is. And my senior year, I tied the high school record for the back then 440, right?
Right.
And it ran like a 50 flat. Now, that's a respectable quarter,
Sure,
right?
Absolutely.
But you go to state, and if you weren't running sub 48, you weren't going to place.
No.
So you go from that small town, I'm a stud, to the big time, I'm a dud.
Well, that's the way it is with the sports that have a clock. Other sports you can kind of delude yourself, like in basketball. If we ran the triangle offense, that would have been more suited towards me or other things. But swimming, running, triathlon, if you don't run or swim X amount of time, you're not cut for it. And that's what I love those sports, is because there's, it's cut and dry. Did you run a sub 48, 440? No. Well, then you're not making state. That's the end of the story.
Right. Simple as that. Cut and dry. So when we look at football versus rugby, then, am I correct in assuming that there's less time to rest between plays for the most part?
Yeah, rugby doesn't stop moving. It's a lot like soccer, and now there's a little bit of a downtime when they have like the scrum, which is kind of like a huddle, and football, but there's not downtime. And so, yeah, you're constantly moving, and all the players kind of have to play all positions at the same time to some extent. Your lineman type guys in rugby, they don't just get to be linemen. They'll handle the ball as well. And so it's really diverse.
So the reason I asked that is because we know where we're going with this conversation and how it culminates, at least it physically.
Right.
For that reason, then, was rugby maybe more of a custom fit for you because of the endurance element of it, as opposed to just short bursts of explosiveness and then.
In hindsight, probably. I mean, because I don't have that top end speed, but I can run for a very long period of time. And so, yeah, with rugby, if I was suited to a sport better, it was probably rugby, simply because of the continual motion. Like my clock is not gonna, or not my clock, but my energy is not going to drain down.
Sure. And would I be correct in assuming that even throughout football and rugby, through those years, that at least in your off time, you were doing some running?
as little as possible. At the time, I mean, I ran in track in high school, but it was simply because I was bored in the spring and all my buddies were doing track. So it was like, I'm going to go where they are. And, and we had my town had 5,000 people. I was very similar to yours in Northwestern Pennsylvania, but we had the Pennsylvania 2-mile state champion on my team. Wow. And we had another kid who was not far behind him. So I ran a 450 mile and I was at best fourth on the team. So
you had some,
we had studs. And so I was like, oh, I'm not fast. You know, I'm not even fast for a long distance because I can't run that speed. And it's something that stuck with me a long time with regards to knowing where you are in the world. And some people think I have some arrogance or that I'm cocky. And it's like, I just think I have a very accurate idea of where I stand in the world with basically everything. And when you have an idea of where you are, that breeds confidence because you're like, this is what I'm good at, you know? So
it really does. And it's interesting to hear you say that because it mirrors, I guess, kind of my own attitude about myself. I'm very clear on the very few things in life, and I mean few, that I'm good at. And I'm also equally as clear on the multitude of things that I suck at, right? I mean, I know. So sometimes if I come across as arrogant when talking about something I'm good at, it's really, it's not that I think I'm superior necessarily to anybody in a particular way. It's just, I know that one thing I can do well.
Absolutely.
And so if you can do it well, there's no sense beating yourself up when you talk about it, just so that you don't appear to be confident. You know what I mean?
I've always said that humility is an overrated type of attribute, because why should you have a less than accurate idea of what you can do? If you're a good writer, you're a good writer. If you're not, like, I can't dunk. I will never dunk in my life. Like I have no ability to jump. And but knowing that doesn't lessen me. I just know what I'm good at. It's not dunking.
Right. No, I get that. And I guess when it comes back to your professional life, I mean, it's kind of hard to go out and get sponsors if you're not talking about what you can do.
Oh, absolutely. Right? Yeah. Well, I love when people say, oh, you're a self-promoter. It's like, yes, 100%.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, that's, I look at that on Twitter, for example, or social media. My goal on social media is to get my message in front of as many people who will wind up going, oh, I'm glad I got that message. To do that, the more numbers you have, the more chances that people have of seeing it. So again, it comes back to, we'll talk about this more as we get into the ultramarathoning and type stuff where you started picking up promoters, because I think that's an important thing to touch on for people maybe out there who haven't yet pursued something like this, but that might be someday. You are going to have to promote yourself in a positive and aggressive way, because nobody wants to sponsor somebody that's meh.
Yeah, me and is not talking. Absolutely.
Sure. Okay, so your first marathon, I believe, well, you go to law school. Let's talk about that. Was that something that throughout high school, were you thinking about law school, or how did that come up?
Yeah, the only thing I'd ever wanted to do in my life was to be a officer in the CIA, and law school was the means of which I had the best opportunity to do that. I'm not a military guy. Like, utmost respect, I don't have that in me to follow orders like that. So I wasn't going to be a police officer. So law school was one of the only ways to get in there. So law school was, from an early age, it was law school CIA. That was the plan.
Okay. Got you. So you're in law school, and we're not too far out then, I guess, from your first, it's 12-hour run, and it's Presque, is that correct?
Presque Isle. Yeah.
Endurance Classic, a 12-hour run where you ran 84 miles.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, for anybody listening, I want to say this. The furthest distance I have ever ran in a race, and one time only, was the Honolulu Marathon, right? Just a tad over 26, what?
Yeah, 26.2 miles. Yeah.
Yeah. That was, up to that point, I had done maybe one or two at most half marathons, but mostly I was kind of like a 10K and a 5K guy, right? And I was not, I was far from a professional at that. I just enjoyed competing.
Sure.
So I run this Honolulu Marathon, and I'm not even at the halfway point yet, right? And I hear this clump, 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 clump. Sounds like a horse behind me. And I'm like, why would there be a horse that's staying behind me like that? And it gets a little closer, And finally, in my peripheral vision, I see it coming around me. Now, out of 32,000 people in the Honolulu Marathon, I think there were 14 or 15,000 who were Japanese who would come there.
Yeah, there definitely is a very high percentage of foreign runners.
Yes. So here comes this Japanese dude in like a kimono and wooden clogs passing me. And it's not 2 minutes later, and again, I'm not even at the halfway point, and I'm a considerable distance from a halfway point, and coming my way, going back, are the top 3 Kenyan runners.
Sure.
You know, the world class. I found out between the wooden clog guy and the Kenyans, okay, this is a recreational thing for me, right? So I wanted to tell that story because I was as depleted as I ever been after that 26 miles.
Sure.
In fact, I remember it was about the 20-mile mark, and to this day, I'm convinced, had this woman not have handed me a fistful of Jolly Ranchers, I wouldn't have made it. I always heard people talk about the wall. I don't think I had ever experienced anything remotely resembling the wall. That day I slammed into the wall about mile 20.
Right.
And I really took the candy only because I was trying to take my mind off of the, right?
Pain, exhaustion.
Sure. And I get that in me. And about 2 minutes later, it felt like I came back to life, and I was able to finish.
Right.
So we are talking about over 3 times further than what I ran the Honolulu Marathon. Right. In your first distance run, tell me how you go about training for something like that as compared to, say, a traditional marathon.
Well, that's the thing is, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but of all the things that I've accomplished in the running world, that 12-hour race is probably the most impressive given the totality of the circumstances, because I had never run a step over 26.2 miles when I did that 12-hour race.
Wow.
And I had so you say the training, there was no training. I had no idea. I was going to go out there and I was going to try to just plod along for 12 hours and just see what I could get. My offhanded goal was 50 something miles. I thought, okay, a marathon takes me 3 and change. I've got another 8.5 to go. Can I run another marathon over that? And I was like, I'm going to stop, I'm going to walk, and I'm going to do all of that. And I thought that was the highest that I was going to get. And it ends up that the weather for that race was absolutely perfect for my particular skill set. It was cold and cloudy, a little bit of rainy. And as I've learned in 400 some odd races since, I don't run well in heat. I run when it's cold. I do most runners if they knew about it, but that day was perfect in every mile that clicked by, because it was a 1 mile loop that you ran, and every mile I just was chugging away. And I honestly had no idea how well I was doing. And it was a pure ignorance is bliss thing, because
Sure.
If I had known that there's really no way I should have been able to do that. There's not only with my lack of training, I mean, just utter lack of training, but also the fact that, and again, I don't want to step on any further, but I have a genetic makeup that that I shouldn't be allowed to do that. And so, yeah, go ahead.
Interesting you say that, because that was a question I wanted to ask you about. I know, for example, that in the UFC, a guy that was really kind of dominant for a while, Randy Couture, he was a former collegiate wrestler. And I know they did all kinds of testing on him genetically and all kind of lab work. And one of the things they discovered is that he has this kind of freak genetic gift, if you will, that it takes like 3 times as long as it does for the average person for lactic acid buildup to reach a point of like, okay, done, right? Which allowed him to outlast people. A lot of those holds in, say, jiu-jitsu, for example, you may have to hold somebody with your muscles contracted there for a long, long time. Right. And there's a point at which, for a lot of people, they can't any longer.
Sure.
But he could keep going. So I was going to ask if you'd ever done any type of testing. I mean, it's safe to assume you've got more slow twitch muscle fiber than fast, for example, but that's kind of a given. In terms of your VO2 max and things like that, have you ever had any of that checked?
Yeah, so there's a friend of mine named Dean Karnassus. He's an ultra marathon runner. He kind of ushered in the sport to the masses, and he is known for very similar to Randy. His lactate threshold is through the roof, and so we became friends. And so I was curious about all of my different variables, and so I went and had my VO2 max tested. I had the lactate tested. I had all the benchmarks that you normally get tested, and I am decidedly meh in all of them. Like they show that I'm an athlete, but there's no number that you look at that you're like, oh, that's why. In fact, a few years after I did all of the things that I'm best known for, I was in a bicycle accident and was at the ER, and a friend of mine was a doctor who looked at my blood levels, and she says, you have Gilbert syndrome. And I said, well, what is that? When did I get that? And she's like, no, you're born with it. And what it does is it makes it markedly difficult to recover from strenuous activity. And I was like, so the one thing I'm known for is the one thing I shouldn't be able to do. So the one test that came back in a way that had any sort of like major bearing is one that says, no, you shouldn't be able to do this. And so that's why the title of my last book was Ignore the Impossible, because if you look at my VO2 max is okay, my lactate threshold's okay, I have Gilbert syndrome, I have all these things that would be like, there's no way you can do what you've done, like run 84 miles in 12 hours with no training. Sure. But I did it. And so obviously there's something else that I haven't been tested for that allows me to succeed. I'm a big proponent of, I've never understood people who get too arrogant about virtually anything that they're given with regards to their body, because I say, it's DNA. Like, even if you're like, well, yeah, but I train really hard. But I'm like, yeah, but you train really hard because you got good DNA. This whole idea that you can out-train everything. And I get it. I was actually had a conversation with this on Facebook a while back. I get that extremely talented athletes don't want their hard work to be diminished, They don't, they want to be like, no, I work hard. Like, yeah, but you also, your floor is most people's ceiling. Okay. Let's let's not pretend that if I just train harder, I'm going to make the Olympics in the 100-meter dash. It's not that.
Right.
But you do have to work hard. So I don't know what it is about me that allows me to, why I was able to run that 84 miles in 12 hours. People have done a lot more. I'm not saying that it's pretty high up there, but for someone to have zero talent, or I'm sorry, zero training to do that, I broke the record for that course, and no one has come within 7 miles since then, and that was 21 years ago. So I don't have any idea what happened there.
Well, a couple of, and I'm sure you've thought about this and talked about this with fellow ultramarathoners. A couple of things that come to my mind as likely possibilities. One, I'd say you are incredibly efficient at optimizing performance in terms of taking what you have and squeezing all that you can out of it in the most efficient way possible. Then the second part, I would have to assume that's where the mental aspect of things comes into play. Now, are either of those two things that you've thought about before?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel that, so I've run a fairly decently fast marathon, and I've done that while I was doing all different types of other races. And I've had friends that said, do you think that if you just focused on the marathon, you could have run faster? I said, yes, but I don't think much faster. Not so much that it would have made any difference in the world for me trying to be like a professional athlete. I think I have squeezed the living bejesus out of every little talent that I have. And it's what it is. Like, I ran a 2:49 marathon, which to some people is exceedingly fast, but at the same time, it's nearly 50 minutes slower than the world record, which means I was at mile 17 when the guy finished the world record.
Sure.
And so that's what I love. Like I talked about it. Like I know what this body can do more than most people do because I've wrung everything out of it that I can. And yeah, I'm pretty decently strong in the head. Like I could, because I know that's just a sport. Like if I don't finish this race or I don't do as well as I can, it's not like they're going to take my family away from me or something. And so it's just like run as hard as you can or do what you can and push through. I'm pretty good at disassociating, from pain, from being tired, and just push through. And so I tap dance on that red line of hitting the wall very well. Yes. And I learned that a lot of people use their watches or all their mechanics now. I did it prior to that just by listening to my body. And so I'm really good at getting the best out of the minimal that I have. So,
Dane, I understand that. Now, I don't know that this is how you go about it mentally. I don't know that this is how you get there, but I too am very good at dissociating, right, from pain and physical. The way, and I didn't realize this for a long time because usually all of this happens unconsciously. We don't know how we get to
Of course, sure.
But I finally figured out that when I develop, when I'm in that situation where it's beneficial to me to dissociate, there's kind of a chip on my shoulder attitude that comes over. There's almost like a personality shift of, you can't stop me from this.
Okay.
And it takes me physically, at least perceptually, to a different place where pain just doesn't apply. Is that anything like what you're talking about?
It's, the thing is about long distance running is you really listen to the pain and you're like, is this pain that's going to go away or is this pain that I can deal with? And if it's just pain I can deal with, if I didn't tear my ACL and it's just my quads are tired, well, then I'll just ignore that, and so it's just like, shut up, legs, I'm just going to keep going. So yeah, it's something along those lines of just having mind over matter type stuff.
Right. And I think the thing that jumps out about what you've been saying here that I think is really beneficial for anybody listening, whatever goal they may have. I know a lot of times in life, people, they'd like to do something. They'd like to write a book or run a marathon or any number of things. But the thought that comes to mind is, well, I wouldn't be very good at that probably. And without realizing it, usually the comparator they're using is somebody that's really good at it.
Right, exactly.
So they're looking at Stephen King or an Anne Rice in their literary skill and going, well, I couldn't write like that. Well, there are some really well-selling books out there from people who can't write like that either.
No.
But they realize there's room for all kinds of levels.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I'll read like an article or something on something like, oh my God, that person can write so well. Like, I'm such an amateur. But like, if I were to like keep that from allowing me to write at all, I mean, there's multitudes, there's gray areas, there's the big meaty part of the curve, you know, find your niche in there. And yeah, like I'm never going to be the best writer. And my writing style is always very conversational. Everyone who reads my book says it's like, sounds like they're just chatting with me at the time. And so that's what I'm good at. Well, do it, you know?
Yes. And I hope people listening, watching, get this out of that segment, that you don't have to be superior genetically. You don't have to be superior in any way to begin. And you may surprise yourself at how much better than you thought you were that you wind up being. And it sounds like there was an element of that for you when you first started this path of ultramarathoning, that, like you said, you thought maybe you would top out 50 miles.
Yeah, virtually everything. I mean, so I ran a 200-mile race that was a relay. It was a 12-person relay, but I ran it by myself. So I ran 202 straight miles. And I had never until that point finished a 100-mile race. And this was, was this 12 years ago already? Those 200-mile races now, I don't want to say they've become commonplace, but they're kind of a thing that a lot of normal people are doing now. And I like to think that I helped spearhead the movement to doing things that just seem completely impossible. And now people do them on the regular almost. And so there's no way I would have ever thought that I could run for 50 straight hours. And now people do these 6-day races and 30-day races. I'm not joking you. Like there's a race in New York City where they run 3,100 miles around a city block. It takes them like all summer. And it's insane what the human body can do. It's just incredible.
It is. Is there an element of once you've, for example, if I get up out of my chair in the living room and I go outside to check the mail, walk across the street to the mailbox and check the mail, I've done that so many times, right? I don't have to psych myself up for it. There's no question. It's just, I'm going to go get the mail.
Right.
Is there an element of that even with 100 miles? Once you've done 100 miles a few times, that there's that element of, of course I'll finish it. I've done it before.
There's an element of that, but the true element is realizing. So I've run 165 marathons. Okay. And 165 marathons makes it easier for me to get to the finish line of the 166 marathon, but it doesn't guarantee it. And the reason I say that is last year I had my first ever DNF in a marathon. I didn't finish the race. And you would think, oh, you've run 160, at the time it was 164. They're like, you would think you would, and could I have finished the marathon? Yes. But it was not a goal for me to just crawl across the finish line. And it ends up now, I realize, I tore my meniscus in my knee later last year. And so I think this was the beginning of it. but it was also an energy thing. I just wasn't, that day, I was not good enough to finish in the time that I wanted to. And so I think to answer your question, you can never underestimate the difficulty of a marathon or a 50 miler or even a 100 miler. But what finishing them does is it takes away the allure of the impossibility of it. And so it's more along the lines of, not only can people do this, I can do this. Now the question is, can I do it today? And so that's the big thing with everything. You can walk the mailbox, you can walk the mailbox, but can you do it today? And that's where the unknown is you don't know. Like every day is very, very different. The amount of stuff that has to go in work for you in order for you to finish a 1 mile race, let alone a 100-mile race. The human body is so weird. Like how we're designed to even function is amazing to me. And so, I guess the long answer to your question is it doesn't make me feel that it's going to be easy. It makes me think it's going to be easier now that I've done it a few times.
Okay. And I guess then to kind of borrow from how you've answered that, I guess like for me on the mailbox analogy, one of the variables would be, okay, if there's a 55 mile an hour headwind out there, can I do it then? Right. So it depends on certain variables. Yes, in good conditions, I can always walk to the mailbox and back. But if this, and this, okay, I got you. Yeah. I got you. So gear-wise, let me ask you, I'm just personally curious about this. Gear-wise, my thoughts are when I think of ultramarathoner, I think of somebody that's probably went the way of like Hoka shoes, the thick-soled, really shock-absorbing shoes. For you, is there much of a gear change between a traditional marathon and say a 100-miler or no?
Yeah, to some extent, it depends on the 100-miler, because there could be 100-milers that are run on a road. Now, trail running and ultra running have kind of become synonymous lately, where if you're going to run very far, you're probably also going to run through wilderness. But in the olden days, at the turn of the last century, the early 1900s, ultra running was done in front of huge crowds at like Madison Square Garden, where two guys would run around a track for 24 hours. And so, wow, it's weird to think of it that most people think of ultra running as the same as trail running, and they're not. So to answer the question, it really depends on what particular race, because I've done races that require a little bit better technical gear. I am not a big fan of the ultra marathons that require a lot of walking and using poles and almost like orienteering type races. Hats off to the people that do those, but that's not my jam. I like to run. I don't like to hike. And so there are some ultra marathons out there that are on a bucket list for some people, but I have no desire to do them because it requires like thinking. I don't want to think. Like I don't want to have to pull out a compass and find out where I have to go. I want to like get on a road or a trail and run as far as I can, as fast as I can. So I tend to skew more towards the races that have as little technical stuff as possible. I just want to run.
You bet. Nutritionally, do you approach it like a traditional marathon, but just more of it? For example, I would assume keeping your glycogen stores, the glucose up is important, caloric intake. How do you approach that, the nutritional, both prior to, say, 100-miler and during?
Well, that last part's a really good addition to your question, because, not to repeat myself, but it really depends on the type of race, what you're going to eat and what you're going to need to take in. But there is no magical elixir on race day. It is really the that you do. Like you said before the race, like what did you eat for the previous 4 months before the race? That matters way more than what you're going to eat on race day. It's what have you been training yourself to do, so that when you get there, you just need to fine tune stuff. I have found personally that I don't process food very well when I'm running ultras. I prefer liquid. So, I ran the entire coast of Oregon in a week. So it was 365 miles over 7 days. And while I was running, basically my only fuel was Mountain Dew. So I would just drink. Yeah. Because it was the sugars. And then when we'd stop for the night, I would have like a literal meal. Like I wasn't worrying about gels or any of that sugary stuff. I'd have like a hunk of steak and salad. And so I'd get my protein and some roughage. But during the actual running, there's so many pictures of me during this run that I did where I'm just holding a big 1 liter of Mountain Dew because my body processed liquid a lot better than it did solids.
Yeah. And I would guess that other ultra marathoners who couldn't do that. In other words, if they tried to Mountain Dew it all the way through it just wouldn't work for them. Am I right?
Yeah, absolutely. What's fun is, I'm a little divorced from the ultra world. I haven't run an ultra in a couple of years, partially because of COVID. And then when I had the knee surgery, I've been out for about 6 months now. But it's fun to watch as the sport evolves and more people get involved with it. And you see the different ways that people do everything from fueling to what they wear for clothing and all that. And so, yeah, it's crazy what people can digest and what they can't digest based on, and unfortunately, it's usually a trial and error thing. And so you learn the hard way what you can and cannot take in when you see it on the other way out.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. That's so fascinating. So again, we come back to this thing, and although the testing that you have done didn't necessarily show it, there's still like this freakish genetic component to you that just allows you to do things that other people at least choose not to do because it just doesn't bring them to that level of proficiency that it does with you. And I'm assuming that the Mountain Dew thing, that was kind of a trial and error too, right?
I don't even remember where that started. It might have been, I mean, for the longest time, they would serve like defizzed Coke at aid stations of ultra marathons. So they would like let it get flat. And it was that sugary rush that you could get because your body can absorb calories quicker from liquids than food without the extra energy it takes to digest it. So it might have been just a happenstance where somebody had Mountain Dew and I took it and all of a sudden felt like Superman or something like that. So, it was just trial and error.
And the defizzed aspect was just to prevent bloating.
More or less. Yeah. It started with, Frank Shorter in the 1970s, running, he did a lot of the defizzing. And what's so funny to think about what trendsetters and trailblazers they were, because they didn't have water bottles back then. They had, they would take, do you remember the honey that would come in the shape of a bear? Do you remember that bottle that they would use, that was their sports drink bottle.
Actually, we have a bottle of that here.
Is that right? Oh, that's great. So that was their water bottle with these like honey bears that they had. And I don't know if they fully cleaned them out, if there was still a little bit of honey in there that helped with the sugar or what. I don't know. It's just, it's funny to see how far we've come in such a short period of time.
Fascinating. And it's funny to hear you say Frank Shorter. That instantly brought back, Bill Rogers, of course, who was the big Boston Marathon king for so long.
Yes.
I think Shorter, he ran in the 76 Olympics, I believe, didn't he?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. So let's kind of climb the ladder now. Let's talk about some of the things that you've done with the ultra marathoning in terms of where you decided to take that, some of the concepts that you had for, okay, let's do this, and then maybe we can have some people sponsor us so that it's feasible to do this. Tell me about some of those things.
Well, it was very, happenstance. So, I'm best known for running 52 marathons in 52 consecutive weekends. And even when I did that, I didn't think that running was going to be a huge part of my life. I was still interviewing to be in the CIA when I was doing that. And when I didn't get into the CIA, I was like, well, what am I going to do? And running kind of just fell in my lap. And for this one company, the last company that I worked for, I was doing public speaking for them to promote their races. And I didn't know that that was going to become my life as well, which is just kind of crazy. So a lot of the stuff that I've done has, people say, oh, you're so brave to branch out from the corporate world and start your own. And it wasn't bravery as much as that's what happened. And I wanted to see what I could do with it and try to, I learned that I was never going to be an Olympian athlete. I didn't have that skill set, but I could do things that other people couldn't. And so I wanted to utilize that to try to make a difference in the world and try to, I raised a lot of money for charity. That was one way. And then when the opportunity came for me to be an advocate in some capacity for politics and that, I wanted to use the name that I had created to do that. Because if you've got a voice and people are listening and you don't do something good with it, what's the point of it? It was kind of what I thought.
Yes. In terms of sponsors, when you would go talk to a potential sponsor, kind of what was your elevator speech, so to speak, in terms of, okay, here's what I do, here's what I'll do with it, and here's what you get?
Well, it was, when I did the 52 marathons, it was right when marathoning was really, really taking off again. And the average runner didn't know a lot of the elite athletes, but they knew characters like myself, or I had a story that could be presented to them, because the average runner didn't know the difference between a 2-hour marathon and a 3-hour marathon. They were both times that were completely unreachable to them. So what I presented was a story of a guy, whether you've run a marathon or a mile, or even if you know a marathon is 26.2 miles or not, you know what running one of them every single weekend for an entire year kind of is like. And that reached out to the masses. And so I said, hey, I have this story that is very packageable to people to say, hey, look, I'm not an extremely talented person. I don't have any sponsors. I'm doing this all on my own. Look what I can do. This is something that more people will connect with than, like you said, the Kenyan runner who, is God blessed to be the most amazingly talented athlete. And I'm fortunate to be blessed with the gift of gab a little bit as well. So I can not only do the activity, I can then relate it to people, because that's important. I know lots of amazing athletes who are, God bless them, boring as hell. They're not good at selling themselves at all.
Absolutely.
So,
right. And in so many areas, well, let's focus on sports, for example. If you look at your real superstars in any particular sport, and again, I will just come back since I already mentioned Randy Couture. Let's look at the UFC. The big name, it wasn't just that they won a lot of fights. They had a big personality and were able to communicate exquisitely after the fight, right? They had the ability to make themselves their own brand. And if you can't do that, it's a situation where just being a superb fighter isn't going to propel you to superstar level, because you got to have both. So yeah, the ability to speak and to communicate ideas effectively, and then in your case, to also write, you know, that's a big piece of of the whole thing. And I can only imagine that was very useful when you were seeking sponsors.
Yeah. I mean, what's interesting is my speaking career took off because of my writing career. And what was interesting was how many people would hire a speaker to speak because they had written books. And I never understood that corollary, because there are plenty of great writers that are not good speakers. And, but I can't count how many times that I got a gig as a speaker because I had written books, and the book would get me the gig that paid me 10 times more than I ever made selling my books, but I wouldn't have gotten the gig if I didn't have the book. So it was this kind of convoluted way.
It is the most important and effective business card someone can have. People lose business cards. People don't tend to throw away books. You know, you send a book in with your contract. Like you said, if you've got 5 speaker packages on the desk in front of you and only one has a book by that person, pretty good chance the guy with the book or gal is going to get the gig. And that's just the hard truth of that. So, yeah. And
it was the way I had to differentiate myself, because I knew that I wasn't, and I came across as like I knew I wasn't an Olympian, but I was like, this is what I've done, and you can choose to be impressed with it or you cannot, but it still exists what it is. This is what I've done. And that's what I tried to put out there, was like, this is what I've done.
Right. And a book does something else that's very important. When somebody accomplishes something, let's say somebody sets a world record or does some, fantastic accomplishment in the world of sports or business or anything else, those things exit the mind of people pretty quick because they're replaced by other things that other people are doing, right? A book has that way of reminding people on a periodic basis of that thing you did. Whether it's the book they see on the shelf or on the coffee table, or maybe they pick it back up to read, or somebody mentions it. It's like, yeah, that's that guy that did whatever. Whereas otherwise, they may have forgotten it completely. So yeah,
that's funny, because after I did the 52 marathons, I did a few other feats that I thought possibly were more impressive. And I kind of got a little bummed at first because people were always introducing me as the 52 marathon guy. And I used to think, oh man, I'm always going to be the 52 marathon guy. And then I realized, well, wait, I'm always going to be the 52 marathon guy. They can never take that away from me. And that resonates in people's minds more than a 202 miler or running the coast of Oregon, because those all fall into that lofty area of people. They can't understand 200 miles. They can't understand 26 miles. They're not going to understand 200, but 52 marathons, it rings a bell. And it's something that I'm very proud that I was able to do. And I set out very specific parameters that I had to accomplish it. I couldn't make up a race. I couldn't run one, that wasn't actually a marathon. If in the 50th week of the year, my race got canceled when the whole year was over. And so it was sticking to those parameters and not making any sort of allowances. That I think that's why it stuck with people, was because people have done similar things since then, but there were always like these built-in caveats. They ran one on a treadmill because it was too snowy, or, things of that nature. And that you don't get to choose that in life. You have to show up on the day of the event and perform that day. And I think that's why people, why I matter 18 years after I did the 52 marathons.
Yeah. And you, like you said, I assume this is still the case where people still connect you to the 52 marathons guy, all
it
these
helps
years
I
later.
look just as old now as I did back when I was 30. So I look the same, I'm just.
Yeah, that's a big plus, right? No, I mean, really, yeah. When I asked you earlier, before we started the recording, or maybe it was on the episode, you don't remember, but I asked you your age and you said you were, I think 48. You could have given me a age considerably younger than that, and it wouldn't have raised a red flag. I'd been like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see that. So yeah, you don't look like the average guy about to turn 50 for sure, you know. And if I were to remove my hat right now, you'd see that you've still got something going on top that I ceased having long ago. So that helps as well.
The hair helps. It's super thick and it's never going to go anywhere. Everyone who's ever passed away in my family had a full head of hair. So this is going to be here for a while, fortunately.
That's a good perk. Yeah, that's a good perk. I've got more I want to ask you about, but let's make sure people have at least a couple of chances to find out where to find you, how to contact you, all of that kind of stuff.
Well, the best place, I have a website called See Dane Run, like See Spot Run. That's a good jumping off point. With a name like Dane Rauschenberg, I'm pretty Googleable. If there is another Dane Rauschenberg on the planet, I feel bad for him because he has zero internet presence. But the one thing I'm really excited about right now is I'm releasing an app soon called Sherpa, and it's an on-demand app that connects athletes with their own personalized guide. So it's kind of like Uber, but for runners. So if I were to come to Missouri and I wanted to go for a run and I didn't know where to go, I booked like a concierge that will take me out for a run. So you can safely exercise anywhere, which is a huge thing, obviously, for all people, but definitely females. And so that's the thing I've been working on in some capacity for the past 10 years. It's but yeah, if you go, the website's gowithsherpa.com.
What a great idea.
So we're excited about it.
Gowithsherpa.com. Yeah, that's boy, you know, the discover the need and then fill it, and that's certainly a need out there. You know, unfortunately, at this juncture, we find, and not just women, but we find ourselves thinking more and more about public safety because, at least perceptually, it seems like it's a more dangerous atmosphere right now, if even just politically, right? So
yeah, I mean, all the statistics show that we're a much, much, much safer country than we've ever been, but we're more aware of the stuff that goes bad, you know, so it seems like it's worse. And so perception is reality, as we've come to learn. So that's what we're trying to do is we can't make the world safer and we can't change people's minds. So we're going to try to provide you with the opportunity to have no excuses when it comes to exercise, because now you'll have somebody who will be there to safely get you through it.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I think it's Steven Pinker that had written fairly extensively about this, that statistically we are safer now than we've ever been, right? In terms of acts of violence. And that's why when I was making the statement, I said perceptually, because here's the thing. Perceptions shape our reality. So the fact that statistically there may be less violence isn't going to do much for the woman who wants to go run but is afraid because of her perceptions. So
100%.
Perceptions can almost be more limiting than reality itself.
100%. I couldn't agree more. Which is, like I said, the app has a lot of safety features built in that we don't want to minimize that they're there, but we don't want to talk about them, because we want you to think about exercising and not have to think about being safe. And people say, oh, it's a little frightening to go run with a stranger. I said, is it any less frightening than getting into a stranger's car with like Uber? I mean, that was the thing we were told to never do when we were growing up. And so we're hoping to eliminate that fear and allow people to exercise when and where they want. There's already enough things that keep us from staying in shape as it is. We don't want fear to be the one that stops people. And so we're to try to, we're going to be nationwide and then eventually worldwide. Anywhere you go, there's going to be a Sherpa there to take you out on your exercise. So that's something I'm really excited about.
Brilliant idea.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And I like how you are always thinking in terms of how you can move forward in a beneficial way to other people, coming from the core of running. The whole idea of activity, physical activity, and doing more and pushing your limits. We see so often it would be really easy for somebody who's made a name for themselves in a particular area to just reap the rewards of that, right? It's like, I do this and bring it to me. I like that you are bringing things to other people. This app, I mean, that's almost other people exclusively, right? I mean, it's, we've seen what can happen with apps, right? That an app that catches on in just a matter of 2 months,
right,
can be on the phones of hundreds of thousands of people. So that one idea of yours about how to increase safety and allow people to do something they want to do and feel safe in doing it, wow, the potential for that. So it sounds like you're a pretty good business guy as well, right?
Well, I throw a lot of stuff against the wall. And like, what was it? Edison said he found 1,000 different ways to not make a light bulb. That's kind of what I've done with my career is,
yes.
People often say, how do you write a book? How do you start a speaking career? And how do you meld all these things together? And I've jokingly said, okay, well, first run 52 marathons in a year. And then it's easy after that. Everything else just falls into place. I mean, that's not true, but my dad once said that when things started coming together for me after I've been working on this for a long time, he said, you're just a 15-year overnight success story, aren't you? And I said, yeah, that's it. Just took me a decade and a half to get here. That's all. So,
hey, I've always, and it's a story I've told myself, but it's not completely fiction because I generated this story based on the experience that I've had in life. But I've always been a really late bloomer, right? I was a late bloomer educationally, in just every phase of my life when everybody else was passing me by. And I'm like, man, why can't I get this to work? Why isn't this going for me? And so many times, just through hanging on, just through persistence, I'll hit a track where, okay, now, not only have I caught up with my peers, but in some cases, maybe I've surpassed. So for me, the thing is just hang on,
right?
Just don't quit, which I think is probably a big theme of yours, right? Just don't quit.
I mean, if you want to really loop it all together, that's a marathon for you. Just don't quit. Like, if the finish line's going to be there for you, they'll hold it open for, 8, 9, 10 hours. Just keep moving forward. And,
right.
And I also say that stopping is not quitting as well. Stopping is just pausing. Quitting is completely different. There's nothing wrong with, a lot of runners never want to have a DNF. They never want to have a do not finish. And I said, it's fine. Like, right. No one cares. Like, I had a friend who was getting ready for a Zoom call one time, and she says, "Is how's my hair? How's my this?" I go, "No one's looking at you. They're looking at themselves. Like, they don't care." It's the same thing with most of the stuff we do on a daily basis. No one cares. No one cares you didn't finish that race. No one cares you didn't finish that book. Like, just as long as you don't fully quit, the world can be yours.
Are you still with me?
I'm there. Can you hear me?
Okay, I can now. We had a little interruption there, but it looks like we're back online.
Okay, great.
I know you've written books, right? And we can talk about those books, but I want to kind of go in reverse order because you told
Sure.
me if you don't want to talk about it, just let me know. I know you have a new book that you are working on and it will be coming out. It's kind of an emotional thing for you.
Yes.
It's honoring somebody, and I'm assuming that it's who it's honoring that makes it as emotional as it is. Can you speak to that?
Sure, absolutely. So, my mother passed away. I can't believe it's almost been 2 years now. It was October of 2022. She had heart problems her entire life. She had rheumatic fever when she was a child that scarred her heart and was so bad. She was bedridden for 2 or 3 years of her first 8 years of life. And, they actually read her last rites when she was 8 years old. Like the priest came in and did the whole thing because they thought that she was gone. And she lived another 65 years. And so she, when she passed away, I was tasked with cleaning out her house, which she was a bit of a hoarder. And by bit of a hoarder, I mean world champion 8 times over hoarder. And she kept virtually everything. And I found that she had kept every postcard I had ever sent her in my life. And so I am writing a book that is telling her story through all the postcards that I sent her for the past 35 years. And so it's going to be called Postcards to My Mom. And it's going to be telling the story of a woman who on the surface was not particularly interesting. By that, I mean, she didn't travel much. She was unable to go to places, but she was a stellar woman that I think that everyone will be able to find their own parents in her details. And so it'll be something that'll make everybody think fondly of someone close to them in their life.
And have you found the act of writing this book, a cathartic experience for you?
It was both cathartic and very challenging. My family is close without being close. We don't share a lot of feelings or emotions really. And in cleaning out her house and her younger sister, my aunt, was very integral in helping me do this. She lived 1 mile away from my mother. And nice. I have learned more about my aunt and my mother and my family in the past year than I did the previous 47 years before that. And so it's challenging because I really wanted to make a success for myself so that I could make what I thought was going to be the next 10 to 15 years of my mother's life a lot easier than the previous 70 had been. And just when I finally started being relatively successful, was when she got ill and passed away. And so it's bittersweet that I finally was able to do the thing that I wanted to be able to do. And now I don't have that. So it really drives home the point that I try to tell people, which is to really cherish each day and don't put off for tomorrow what you would be happy dying having not done.
Oh boy, do I understand that. By just about the time things really started to take off for me on social media, right? And I started to, the podcast and the interesting people like yourself that I get to talk to. A couple of years ago, my mother had a really major stroke, right? She's still alive, but and I can communicate with her. She knows who I am, but there's not much of a conversation there. And so it's not that I can show her things or tell her things that are happening and have her really grasp it, right? And feel proud of you. You know what I mean? So
that's tough.
From time to time, I think, man, I'd love to be able to. Now, fortunately, my father is still alive. He's 82 years old. And so I share things with him. but yeah, I get it. Because, mom was always there. Mom was
Right.
the one that you could just see it in her eyes. I'm proud of my son. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. That's why I thought that the book would be helpful, not only for me, but for other people, because we've all had a mother, and maybe some of us aren't as close to our parents as we could be because of maybe they weren't good parents, but people have everyone's had a mother figure in their life, even if it wasn't their actual mother.
Yes.
And so I think writing this book for a woman who was, I think my mom will be an excellent placeholder for other people because she was so generically bland to some extent. Anyone can see their own loved ones in her. She was this vessel that allowed other people to see their own family members in her. Sounds like I'm being rude about my mother, and that's not the case at all. But she was limited in what she was able to do because of not only her own health problems, but my father was crippled in a hunting accident right before I was born. And so she was a caretaker for him until he passed away 12 years ago. So she couldn't go out and enjoy the world because she was basically taking care of my dad. And so there's so many aspects of this book that I never thought about writing it until I was writing it. And then I thought, oh my God, these are really going to reach out to so many people, no matter what their circumstances are. And I hope that does that.
Oh yeah. And as it would almost have to have happened, I'm sure you've discovered more about yourself as well. And that's the beautiful thing about writing. That's what I like about writing. I see writing as a way of organizing my thoughts. I can get what's inside of me together in a more organized fashion so that when I'm done, I go back through it. I actually understand my own thought process better than before I wrote whatever I had written.
Yeah, absolutely. I've learned a lot about myself in the time that, that I wish I had learned before. I wish I wish I could have been a better son,
Right.
And so, so write down stuff now so that you can look at it now before it's too late.
Absolutely. Your other books, let's talk about, we've got Run This Place, 52 run races in North America. We've got Running with the Girls. We've got Women and Running, In My First 100 Marathons. And there are a couple of more. Is there a particular book of those that you'd like to talk about that you can highlight some of what kind of the overall message in that book is?
All of my books, even though they're running centric, are because, I didn't grow up a runner. They're not 100% about running. And so I point towards Ignore the Impossible, which is my most recent book, because it is kind of a culmination of all that I've done in the running world, in the business world, in all the things that I've tried to do, that I think really speaks to the most people. I've seen people who are not runners read some of my running books and realize, well, they've said that they initially weren't going to read them because they weren't a runner. And then they read it and realized it's not a running book. It just happens to have running as a focus. And so I said, well, I took the best of what all those people said and I put it into Ignore the Impossible, because it's a lot of life lessons and all the things that people have asked me about how I've been able to do what I've done. And it's the motivational book for people who hate motivational books, because I'm not a rah-rah, sis-boom-blah kind of guy. And I kind of speak things differently. When people are like, oh, you can do anything you put your mind to. I'm like, no, you can't. There's a lot of stuff you can't do. And that's okay. Like, find what you're good at and do that. So
when you speak, and I know you do motivational speaking, do you find at this juncture, since that is your most recent book, Ignore the Impossible, is a lot of what you talk about come from that book, or do you just pull from all of them when you are
It's mostly the last book, simply because
speech?
The last book already pulled from all of them. So I kind of use that book and as the impetus. And it's weird because I get a lot of pushback because people are expecting you to come in and tell them that they're special and that they can do anything that they want. And I say, I don't know if you're special. I say, but the only way you're going to find out is if you go and act as if you are special and keep chipping away. Never quit. Like we said, it's okay to stop. Just don't ever quit.
Right. I agree with you on so much of your philosophy. I remember one time I was talking to all three of our kids, right? And they all take part in different sports. I can't remember the context of why the conversation came up, but we were talking sports and practice and a recent performance. And we were all at the dinner table. And I said to them, and I wasn't talking down to them, I was just being matter of fact. I said, look, there is no one sitting at this table that has gifted DNA. Nobody here is going to have somebody banging on the door saying, we want to talk to you. We want to look at you, right? You can be good, but whatever level of good you get to, it's going to be largely because of how hard you work, not because you just don't have that gift that the people that are at the peak of whatever sport you may. And my wife, I could see, and she kind of knew my approach to things. I was cool with it, but it was almost like shell shocked, and it's like,
what are you doing? These are your kids.
But I'm so much. In fact, I've said the same thing before, which is why it resonated when you said it. The idea that you can do anything you want to. Again, no, you can't. There are things that I'll never be able to do, no matter what type of coaching or training. The genetics are not there, right?
Right.
So I think when people start from there, I think it's a plus. For somebody.
100%. It's not a negative. It's so funny. You made a metaphor that I used in a speech one time. And I said, very few people are going to be banging on your door. So go kick theirs down.
Right.
That's what I've said.
Right.
Get noticed,
Yes.
like you always hear these stories of like people walking down the street and a model agency found them like, oh my God, I want to cast you. And cool. That happens 1 in a billion times,
Right.
You're not that person. So go kick that the caster's door down. That's what you need to do.
Sure. When you do your motivational speaking, is it largely the corporate world?
It's everything, but it's been more corporate lately. But I've talked to the hardest speeches I've ever given elementary school kids because they are ruthless with not with what they say, necessarily, but like if they don't want to pay attention, their eyes are going to be over here and all that, the corporate world will continue to stare at you while they zone out. You know what I mean? But kids, They're the best. And I gave a speech one time to the last one-room schoolhouse in Minnesota, and it was 7 kids. And there was, when I was passing through, it's a much longer story I won't bore you with, but the day that I could do it, the teacher said, can you do it the next day? And I said, I won't be in town. Why? And they said, well, the Johansons are gone. And I was like, I don't know what that means. Is that code? They're like, no. The Johansons are half of our school. There's like 5 or 6 brothers and sisters. And so it went from like 7 to 12.
That's funny.
And so, but I spoke to, I think they went from 3rd grade to 9th grade. And so I've got to talk to like 7 kids that are going from, 10 years old on up and talk about a tough crowd because you got to like be able to speak to all those life experiences. But yeah, mostly corporate,
tough also in the fact that there were just 7. I've presented to maybe 300 or 400 people in an auditorium on the high end, and as little as 5 on the training end. Right. I would much rather anytime get up in front of 300 or 400 people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Give me a Coliseum rather than a coffee table is what I've said.
Right. Right. You just, the level of scrutiny that you feel with 5 or 7, and I think I've only presented to that age, school age children a couple of times. And like you said, it's, if you're not on, or if you're not holding their attention, they're not going to fake it for you, right?
No.
You don't need them to fill out a survey when you're done. You'll know as it's happening.
Yes, 100%. The survey's on their face and they are not happy. That's what the survey is.
Absolutely. Where are you now in your evolution? I know you've got the app coming out.
Right.
Of course. You continuing to do the speaking, and as you said, and largely because of the knee surgery, you've kind of cut back on the racing for now. Where do we see Dane headed in 5 years? Kind of what's your path?
I mean, it's crazy. So I had this knee surgery in March, and in my previous 25 years of running, the longest I'd ever taken off was 14 days. And I'm rapidly approaching 200 straight days without running. And it's a little telling to me how much running shapes my life, even if it's just a small part of each day, because I had all these very cool ideas that are very running centric that just are sitting on the shelf now because I can't do them. And so,
right.
I'm doing what my physical therapist had told me to do. And if that means I have to take off a year now so that I can run for another 20 years later, it's been painful, but not in a pain sense, but just in a mental aspect sense. I will do that. And so the app is kind of like where all my hands are on deck right now, because I think once that gets going, that's going to open the doors for a lot of other things that I have in mind. But I have a plethora of endurance type challenges left in my brain that I want to do. There's no shortage of them. There's going to be, just got to get this knee ready and then I'll get back in it. And I've got ideas that I've been talks with, like I live in Minneapolis, with the links about running on a treadmill and trying to finish a marathon distance on the treadmill during the time of a WNBA game. And people can place wagers that go to charity on whether I finish 26.2 miles in that time or not. So there's no shortage of things that I want to do. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think people love that kind of thing, because we all kind of, whether we actually do it or not, at least in our head, we like to bet on things, right? And we like to, okay, is this guy going to win? This person? And when people can do that and also give back, or, to charity, I think that's something, that's quite brilliant, actually, to come up with that. So I'm looking forward to that. Oh, one more time, let's tell people who want to find you, where to find you, and what services are available.
Yeah, so I'm on Twitter at CDaneRun. I'm on CDane Run's my website. I'm extraordinarily Googleable, and it's funny, as I had a marketing director one time that says it's kind of annoying how accessible you are to people, because you might create a little bit more of an allure of a professional person if you weren't the person who answers every text, but I am. That's the way I am. So people can reach out to me anywhere. I respond to virtually everybody in the manner that they respond to me, meaning if you're nice to me, I'm nice to you, kind of the way that it is. And so,
nice.
But that's what
I'm curious. Do you do any coaching, like one-on-one coaching?
I do coach athletes online. I haven't done any particular one-on-one coaching in a while. Man, COVID really it's the most stupid understatement of the year, but man, COVID changed everything. I used to coach up to 15 to 20 athletes online at a time, and just priorities changed after COVID, and I'm putting a lot more focus on the people that really matter to me in my life and giving them all my energy. I've cut down my speaking engagements simply because I want to spend more time not on the road. But I feel that I've found different ways to spend less time doing more. And that's what I'm trying to do is get out to maybe even more people but doing it more generally than specific, because specific there's only one of me, you know? So, and I'm pretty tireless, but there's only 24 hours in a day. So
right. And that's the beauty of your app. That's the one thing that you can create multiples of you, right?
Right, exactly.
That it takes away that time constraint of there's
God,
only
what a
one
horrible
Dane.
concept. Multiple Danes. No, don't. That's.
I hear you,
One's
right?
enough.
I've had somebody say that, right? Listen, you're an extremely fascinating guy. You're a very intelligent guy, and yet, I like the fact there is that humble aspect to you, but there's also the aspect of the guy that isn't afraid to talk about his accomplishments, which I so love that, because humble gets boring to me, right?
Yes.
If every time you compliment somebody, or if they're always downplaying even that one thing that they do well, it's like, dude, come on, quit. You don't have to pretend like you're not good at this. You are. So can we just talk about it? And I love that about you. You've done some just mind-blowing things, and I can only imagine that your knee injury and the 200 days off have probably been frustrating in a way that there's a part of you that's like, you know what? When I come back, you watch this, hold my beer kind of thing, right? I'm not done. So I can see that happening. I think people should reach out, buy one of your books. And the one that really sounds compelling to me is Ignore the Impossible, just because you said it's kind of pulled from all the other books, right?
Right.
So it's kind of a concentrated form of Dane. That's where you maybe can really pick up what he's picking up, right?
Yes. So
I'd love to have you back sometime. Good luck with the continued recovery on the knee. I'm sure you will be back in the groove, but we'll talk again sometime. And until then, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, Jack. It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.